approved extensions of FAA programs for 4 months and surface transportation projects for 6 months. And now live coverage of the U.S. Senate here on C-SPAN 2.
Senate will come to order. This morning's prayer will be offered by the Chaplain of the Senate, Dr. Barry Blank.
Let us pray. Eternal Lord God, you are our light and salvation. We will not fear. You protect us from dangers, seen and unseen. We will not be afraid. You know the pressures and tensions that beset our nation and the need for your wisdom on Capitol Hill. Make all of us worthy of the high calling you have given us to be faithful stewards of the responsibilities before us to serve you and our country. Inspire our lawmakers to seek to serve rather than being served, following your example of humility and sacrifice. We pray in your sacred name. Amen.
Pledge allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read the communications to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., September 16, 2011, to the Senate. Under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Joe Manchin III, a senator from the state of West Virginia, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Daniel K. Inouye, President pro tempore.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Following leader remarks, the Senate will be in a period of morning business. Senators permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each. There will be no votes today. The next vote will be on Monday, September 9th at 5:30. We believe we'll begin consideration of the Trade Adjustment Assistance Bill on Monday. We're working on procedures to get to that today. We have a lot to do. Next Friday, we have to have a continuing resolution passed in this body. We had a good week this week. We were able to get the highway bill extended for 6 months, Federal Aviation Administration for 4 months, and of course we were able to have that significant vote on the FEMA legislation, so vitally important to the entire country. It's interesting to note that the President has had emergency declarations of disasters in 48 states. The presiding officer state is one of those that did not have one, as the state of Michigan. H.R. 2587 is due for a second reading, and it is at the desk.
Clerk, will read the title of the bill for the second time.
H.R. 2587, an act to prohibit the National Labor Relations Board from ordering any employer to close, relocate, or transfer employment under any circumstance.
I would object to any further proceedings in regard to this matter at this time.
Objection is heard, and the bill will be placed on the calendar.
Mr. President, today we pay tribute to the American men and women who have traveled abroad to defend this great nation, but never returned home to her shores. We also honor those who have suffered as prisoners of war. We're grateful to them every day. But today, which is National POW/MI Recognition Day, we dedicate our remembrance to their sacrifice. Mr. President, I had the good fortune to be appointed in 1992 by Majority Leader Mitchell to be a member of the Select Committee on MI-POW. That committee was chaired by John Kerry. And it was a wonderful experience for a number of reasons, not the least of which is to watch Senator Kerry, because I really, frankly, didn't know him very well. And I'd been in the Senate for a few years, but when we work here, sometimes you don't really understand how good people are until you work with them on a real close-knit basis, as I did with him because of that appointment. He did a magnificent job of chairing that committee. Of course, he had some standing to look at what went on in Vietnam, since he was wounded 3 times and had a number of Silver Stars for his heroism in Vietnam. But legislatively, that was a great experience for that year, to look to see what had happened in Southeast Asia, all over, not only Vietnam, but Laos and Cambodia, people who had been taken prisoner of war, and certainly, if not, were missing in action. So it was really a good experience for me, and I'll always remember that. So this day, National POW/MI Recognition Day, recalls those memories of many years ago, of the hearings that we held and the evidence we gathered to make a decision as to what really took place there. More than 83,000 Americans are missing from World War II, Korea, the Cold War, Vietnam, and, of course, the Gulf War. There are also soldiers, sailors, Marines reported missing on our wars in Afghanistan and Iraq that are going on right now. We should not and we will not rest until we've accounted for every missing American service person who's fought to protect the freedoms we enjoy as Americans. Although they're missing, they're not forgotten. It's difficult to comprehend the suffering of families who have lost loved ones. I'm hopeful and somewhat confident that it's comfort to them today to know that we give thanks and praise for their dedication to the ideals upon which this nation was founded. That's why today we commemorate the sacrifices made by those families as well as the soldiers that they love. I also give thanks for the brave men and women who wear uniforms to the United States Armed Services today, including more than 2,000 Nevadans currently deployed around the world. Not in the service, but who are Nevadans deployed around the world. Anything worth having, of course, is worth defending. And our freedom is one of the most precious things we have. So today we thank those volunteers who have placed themselves in harm's way to protect this great country. Many of them have paid the ultimate price for our liberty. So today and every day they have the thanks of a grateful nation, but especially today, for their faithful and selfless service to their country. Mr. President, I would note the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved, and under the previous order, the Senate will be in a period of morning business with the senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each.
Mr. President, yesterday I spoke on the floor about the need to restore revenue as part of our deficit reduction efforts. I explained that I've sent a letter to members of the Joint Select Committee now crafting a deficit reduction plan with 7 ideas on how to address our revenue shortfall in ways that reduce the deficit, protect economic growth, and ensure that the sacrifices which are necessary to achieve our budget goals are shared broadly among the American people. Together, these proposals would reduce deficits on the order of $1 trillion over 10 years. And today I want to go into greater detail on 2 of those ideas to address loopholes and tax breaks that are as damaging to our budget as they are unfair to working families. One proposal would stop corporations and individuals from using offshore tax gimmicks to dodge the taxes that they owe. The other proposal would close a loophole that gives corporations a huge tax break when they award stock options to their executives, effectively using the hard-earned tax dollars of American families to subsidize the paychecks of CEOs and other top executives. Now, let's begin with the goal here, deficit reduction. Budget experts tell us we cannot close our budget gap with spending cuts alone. Revenue must play a role. These 2 proposals can help. The Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, which I chair, has estimated that the use of offshore tax havens by wealthy U.S. taxpayers costs our Treasury around $100 billion a year. I believe that legislation to address that issue can recover a significant portion of that loss. The Joint Committee on Taxation estimated that a previous version of the legislation would recover nearly $30 billion over 10 years, but new provisions that we have included should raise that figure significantly, and closing the stock option loophole would save $25 billion over 10 years, according to the Joint Committee on Taxation. This revenue would help the Joint Select Committee in its difficult task of achieving at least $1.2 trillion in deficit reduction, and it would help restore fairness to the tax code without penalizing activities that contribute to economic growth or raising taxes on middle-income America. Our work on the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations has, for more than a decade, exposed the ugly truths of tax haven abuse. A single building in the Cayman Islands, called the Ugland House, serves as the mail drop for nearly 19,000 companies incorporated there for tax-dodging purposes. Of the 100 largest publicly traded corporations in America, 83 have subsidiaries in tax havens. Hedge funds, whose employees live right here in the United States, pretend to be based in tax havens to dodge U.S. taxes. An army of lawyers, bankers, and accountants help U.S. taxpayers use offshore abuses to avoid taxes. All of this shifts the tax burden of these tax dodgers onto the backs of honest taxpayers. Yesterday, the Internal Revenue Service announced that they have recently completed an offshore program where they give a degree of amnesty to people who are willing to come in and pay their taxes. 30,000 such people have come in since 2009. And, Mr. President, that is the tip of the iceberg, is our investigation at the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations disclosed. Now, how do we combat this? Several colleagues and I have introduced legislation called the Stop Tax Haven Abuse Act. Senate Bill 1346. Our bill will authorize the Treasury Secretary to take special measures against foreign jurisdictions or foreign financial institutions that impede U.S. tax enforcement by prohibiting U.S. financial institutions from doing business with those foreign financial institutions in uncooperative jurisdictions. It will help the IRS identify ownership and control of offshore entities. It would stop corporations whose management and control are located primarily in the United States from claiming foreign status to dodge taxes. It would prevent businesses from dodging taxes by claiming that assets physically held in the United States should be treated as offshore assets for tax purposes. And it would treat derivatives payments sent from the United States to offshore entities as taxable income. Enacting this legislation and ending these offshore abuses would penalize tax dodging, not legitimate economic activity, and it will help to bring down the deficit. Similarly, closing the stock option loophole would not penalize productive economic activity. It would instead end an unaffordable federal subsidy for corporate executive pay. Today, under tax rules for reporting stock options, corporations report stock option expenses on their books when those stock options are granted. But they use another method to claim a different and a usually much higher expense on their tax returns when the stock options are exercised. Now, the result is that corporations can usually claim far larger tax deductions for stock options paid on their tax returns than the actual expense that they show on their books for those same options. They get a much bigger tax deduction for exactly the same tax option expense as they show on their books. Stock options are the only type of compensation for which the tax code allows a corporation to deduct as an expense for tax purposes more than what they show on their books for that same expense. IRS data shows that from 2005 to 2009, this loophole allowed companies to claim between $11 billion and $52 billion each year in excess tax deductions. Now, legislation that I've introduced with Senator Sherrod Brown and Senator McCaskill would end these excess deductions by requiring corporate stock option tax deductions to equal the stock option expense shown on the corporate books for those same options. It would not affect the taxes paid by individuals who receive the stock options. Their taxes would not be affected. As of now, they pay for the actual sales price minus their cost. It would not affect so-called incentive stock options, often used by startup companies. And it would make stock option pay subject to the same million-dollar cap on corporate tax deductions that applies to other forms of executive pay. Now, these proposals, Mr. President, will alone put a major dent in the deficit. They would ensure that multinational corporations and wealthy individuals pay the taxes that they owe, just like working Americans. If we're to seriously reduce the deficit, these kind of tax reforms and the resulting added tax revenues must be part of the discussion. And I urge my colleagues, especially those on the Joint Select Committee, to embrace these ideas. Again, I sent a letter yesterday to the members of the Joint Committee, all the members, laying out these 7 ideas, which together will raise over $1 trillion in 10 years. And I'm going to return to the floor again in the days ahead to discuss additional reforms with the resulting revenues that were set out in my letter to the Joint Select Committee. These changes, these reforms, This loophole closing will help to close the gap between spending and revenues that all of us, I know, want to close. Mr. President, I yield the floor. Note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
this morning to take on the naysayer caucus that has developed on the issue of tax reform.
The Senate is in the quorum call.
I'd ask unanimous consent to vacate the quorum call.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I'm going to just take a little time this morning to, as I indicated, make some remarks with respect to this issue of tax reform, and particularly try to lay out why the naysayers, those who say, oh, tax reform isn't going to make any difference anytime soon, or there hasn't been a lot of groundwork laid. Those are the two major arguments they're making. Mr. President, I'm going to try to lay out why those arguments are wrong. And to start with, they reflect a misunderstanding about markets and about free enterprise and about what drives the American economy. One of the major reasons that consumers are not spending and businesses aren't hiring workers is uncertainty about taxes. Enacting fundamental tax reform now because of the rules of free enterprise and markets would start changing consumers' behavior very quickly, and business would be in a position in West Virginia, Oregon, and everywhere else to start making judgments with respect to investment. They can't make judgments right now when you have these piecemeal tax changes that might last a year or a year and a half. That's not the way the American economy works. Businesses in West Virginia and Oregon, they're thinking about investments that are going to last 5, 10 years, even longer, and they need some certainty. And so I'm going to spend some time talking about why permanent tax reform enacted early next year, where we make a start at it with our super committee. We have the good fortune of having Chairman Baucus on it. I serve on the Finance Committee. He's on it. Chairman Dave Camp of the House Ways and Means Committee also on it. And what I feel very strongly, as does the co-sponsor of the legislation that I've authored, Senator Coates, is they can make a good start on tax reform in the super committee, and I'm going to outline how that could take place and then finish it up early next year. So let's start by talking about how you might see people's behavior start changing and getting consumers back into the marketplace and businesses start making decisions. My own view is if working families knew at the end of the year or early next year that they would get real tax relief as they get under the legislation that I've been part of with Senator Coates and Senator Begich and former Senator Gregg, if they knew, middle-class folks, that reduced rates were going to be in place not just for a year, but for the long term, they'd start making the kinds of decisions that they are putting off now because they're uncertain today and they're going to be uncertain next year and the year after if we continue to make these changes in tax law piecemeal. My view is if we saw permanent tax reform enacted early next year, we'd see consumers start going back into the economy, making the kinds of purchases they've been postponing in major appliances, new cars, the other investments that you make when you know that the economy is going to start picking up because millions of others are going to go back into the marketplace just like yourself. And businesses, when they see that additional demand for their products, go out and start hiring more workers. So let's talk for just a minute about how fundamental tax reform puts more money into the pocket of the middle class. Under the legislation I've been part of, with 2 Republicans and Senator Begich, a typical couple making $90,000 would pay close to $5,000 less in taxes, according to estimates by the Congressional Budget Office. Mr. President, the reason that's the case is our bipartisan tax reform triples the standard deduction for that middle-class couple. Triples the standard deduction. And Mr. President, let me emphasize that it is permanent. I want to say that again. Permanent. It's not something that's going to be jerked away in a year. It's something that would be locked into the tax code on a permanent basis. And economists and others have repeatedly said that when you make those kinds of changes, and typical families know that on a permanent basis they'll have more money in their pockets, they will go out and make the major purchases that they have put off in West Virginia and Oregon over the last few years. You talk to them. You talk to them at coffee shops. I know the President of the Senate spends a lot of time getting out and talking with folks. When I go into coffee shops and I ask people, in particular, about why they're putting off major purchases, I talked about appliances and cars, they'll say, I just don't know what's going to happen. I heard that there was this break that I was getting for a year, and I don't know what's going to happen, after that. We need to make permanent changes in the tax law, give permanent tax relief to middle-class people, and then, based on everything we know about economics, people start changing their behavior. They aren't going to do it, Mr. President, not in a big way, without permanent changes, predictable changes, changes that they can count on that won't be jerked away from them in another year or so. The same principle goes for business. Once they know that there's going to be a new tax system in place with reforms, and by the way, virtually all the reform plans, Mr. President, virtually all of them, take the corporate rate today, it's now the second highest in the world, down to somewhere in the mid-20s. Senator Coates and I with Senator Begich, we're at 24. The Bowles-Simpson proposal is a little bit higher, but everybody is pretty much in the same place. You do that on a permanent basis. Businesses will be able to start planning, and they will start planning immediately for the beneficial effects of consumers going back into the marketplace because of permanent changes in the individual tax code and because they know what the rates are going to be. Once a reform tax system was signed into law, Mr. President, we'd have more certainty and we would begin to see the spending, hiring, and investment decisions that are not being made today in the American marketplace by the consumer and by business. Now, it would also be possible to further jumpstart the process and generate economic growth even more quickly. For example, as part of permanent tax reform, you could allow the consumer an advanced refund of the reduced taxes that they will be getting under tax reform. The Congress did that a few years back. It helped a bit in terms of consumer demand, but again, it was short-term. Since it was not combined with reform, permanent reform of the tax code to provide future certainty, it didn't stimulate demand either in the short term or the long term as much as it might have. The bottom line, Mr. President, is that enacting fundamental tax reform now would provide immediate benefits to the economy by ending the uncertainty that I happen to believe is strangling our prospects for real, significant, long-term economic growth. Mr. President, we all understand that the American tax system is an anti-growth mess. It is riddled with loopholes and tax dodges. I sit on the Senate Finance Committee. A big part of the tax system today, the language is pretty much incomprehensible, gibberish. So we do need to make these changes. And now I want to get into this issue that, well, it's not going to be possible to do tax reform now because the groundwork hasn't been laid. I'm sure the distinguished senator from West Virginia has heard this argument. Gosh, we could do it in 2013. We ought to spend more time, studying it and all that. I'll tell you, not only is the uncertainty of putting it off again going to continue to harm the economy. In fact, Mr. President, I predicted after the lame duck session of the Congress in 2010, I said unless we got people moving in a bipartisan way on tax reform, we would have the same debate in the lame duck session of the 2012 Congress. Exactly the same debate about whether or not you were going to, on a temporary basis, extend the Bush, tax cuts. And so if we aren't successful in pushing permanent tax reform onto the agenda, that's what will happen, Mr. President. We'll have the same debate in the lame duck session of the 2012 Congress that we had after the lame duck session in the 2010 Congress, which will be about, once again, trying to patch up this dysfunctional anti-growth tax system we have in our country. So I'd like to now spend a few minutes addressing the claim that it's not possible to do tax reform now because the groundwork hasn't been done. That is awfully puzzling, to me, Mr. President, given all of the tax reform proposals that are out there now and how similar they are. For example, Erskine Bowles and Alan Simpson, when they came to the Senate Budget Committee, said point blank that they modeled their recommendations after our bill. Senator Gregg and I had spent week after week for 2 years working on the legislation. That was, of course, flattering. We were happy about that. But the fact is, going all the way back to some of the studies done by the commission appointed by George W. Bush, and then highlighted by the work done for President Obama, the Volcker Commission, there has been an awful lot of common ground. For example, Mr. President, the tax rates under all of these major proposals involve, on the individual side of the tax code, taking the country from 6 major brackets to 3 major brackets. The Bowles-Simpson proposal really comes in around 12% for the lowest rate, 22% for the rate in the middle, 29% for the rate at the top. Now, the proposal that I've been part of with former Senator Gregg and Senator Coates and our colleague and friend Mark Begich, we are a bit higher than that. That's because we didn't, under our proposal, make changes with respect to the mortgage write-off and the charitable write-off and the changes with respect to middle-class folks who depend on their health care and their retirement. So the point is, we've got something that we can have a real debate on right now. Mr. President, let me highlight one other point. We touched on it yesterday when our group of more than 30 got together. Our proposal has been scored by the Joint Committee on Taxation, the committee that specifically looks at tax law. So if the distinguished senator from West Virginia, the President of the Senate, wants to come in and make a modification in tax law, for example, adjust the rates, say, in these 3 brackets, one way or another, because we have the numbers now from the Joint Committee on Taxation, and it is the only proposal, our bill, the only proposal they've scored, we can give to the senator from West Virginia and any other member of the Senate, the other 98 senators not here, we can give them the actual numbers that have been furnished by the official scorekeeper, the Joint Committee on Taxation, so we can be in a position to have a real debate. There has been an enormous amount of groundwork done, Mr. President, on this issue. I've already mentioned the similarity in reforms on the individual, rates. The corporate rate reforms proposal are similar. repealing the alternative minimum tax. It's in our bill. It's in all of the bills. We understand what a crushing burden this alternative minimum tax is. You've got middle-class folks all over America. If you've got somebody who, say, is on the police force in a town in West Virginia and perhaps their spouse is a teacher, they could be filling out their taxes twice with this bureaucratic nightmare called the alternative minimum tax. It wasn't intended for those kind of people. It was intended for people who managed to get out of paying taxes altogether. So we are in a position, Mr. President, to move forward. And what I and others have said is that if you started in the super committee by laying a baseline, a foundation, you've already got an opportunity for simplicity, moving from those 6 brackets to 3. You've already got an opportunity on the corporate rate where essentially all of the reforms are in the vicinity of going from 35%, to the mid-20s. All of the reforms talking about abolishing the alternative minimum tax. All of the reforms talking about getting taxpayers, individuals and businesses off the roller coaster. The super committee could make a very significant start on major tax reform by the end of the year, and then early next year, we could have a guaranteed legislative process, Mr. President. Let me use those words specifically. A guaranteed legislative process where the Finance Committee, under the leadership of Chairman Baucus, and the Ways and Means Committee, under the leadership of Chairman Camp, could enact permanent tax reform by early next year. Now, I've already talked about how markets work, Mr. President. I think if this holiday season the American consumer can have a sense that we're going to make a break with tax policy as we know it today. We're going to stop all these piecemeal, temporary changes. We're going to make permanent changes. They're going to be built around reform principles which are widely accepted, Mr. President, ever since the 80s, when Democrats and Ronald Reagan got together. The fundamentals of tax reform have been very clear. They're all about eliminating preferences, all of these special interest tax breaks and dodges and loopholes and preferences, eliminating them and using those dollars to hold down the marginal rate, the rate you pay on the last dollar you earn, while keeping progressivity, while keeping a sense of fairness. Those principles are very clear. All the reform proposals are based on them. And it sure seems to me if middle-class people can have the certainty of knowing that tax policy is going to change so that they can start making decisions about their economic, future. Have a real sense that it isn't going to just change in a year, that it isn't just some temporary thing. I think we will start seeing beneficial changes in the American marketplace very quickly. And that, of course, is what tax reform is really all about. It's about getting consumers back into the marketplace and about businesses growing again because they know they're going to have more consumers and they know that they are going to be in a better position to compete in tough global markets. That, Mr. President, means jobs. And I want to wrap up by talking about tax reform and jobs. In the 2 years, Mr. President, after the 1986 reforms, and remember, we have not had fundamental tax reform for a quarter century. For a quarter century, this country has been making almost one tax change a day. Almost one tax change a day, Mr. President. Thousands and thousands of tax changes cumulatively. Talk about what that means for uncertainty for a business and a consumer. We can make a break with that and do what was done in 1986, which translated into a big boost for our economy. And I want to give the numbers specifically, Mr. President, so that folks will see what this tax reform issue is all about. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, Mr. President, in the 2 years after the 1986 tax reform bill, our country created 6.3 million new jobs. 6.3 million new jobs, Mr. President. Sounds pretty good. I think that'd go over pretty well in a coffee shop in West Virginia. It certainly does at home in Oregon. Now, I'm not going to come to the floor of the Senate, Mr. President, and say every one of those jobs, every one of them is due to tax reform. There are a host of issues that go into judgments with respect to why consumers buy those appliances and those basic necessities and why businesses invest. But I'll tell you one thing, Mr. President, you couldn't have generated 6.3 million new jobs in the 2 years after the 86 tax reform bill if you had seen a tax reform proposal enacted that didn't make sense for the American economy. It wouldn't have happened. Clearly, consumers and businesses said that this is a proposal moved by a Republican president, Ronald Reagan, and a host of Democrats, very progressive Democrats, folks like Dick Gephardt, president, strong backing of American labor. They came together and they created 6.3 million new jobs in 2 years, Mr. President, with the kinds of reforms that Senator Coates and former Senator Gregg and Senator Begich and I advocate now that are in line with the fundamental thinking of the Bowles-Simpson proposal, the reforms proposed by former President George Bush and President Obama's own commission directed by Paul Volcker. We have a chance, Mr. President, now to make fundamental changes that will change the direction of our economy and, I think, the psychology of the American marketplace. In this debate, we can talk, for example, about the issues that are front and center with American workers. I'm certain that in those coffee shops in West Virginia, one of the things that is said again and again is, Senator, make sure you keep the jobs here, keep them at home. We're tired of all those jobs going offshore. Well, Senator Coates and I have a proposal that takes away the tax breaks for shipping jobs overseas and uses those dollars to create jobs here at home. Red, white, and blue jobs, Mr. President. Jobs that pay good wages here in the United States because we changed tax policy and made it more attractive to do business in the United States. We can talk about the various ways to do it. There's discussion about a territorial system. There's discussion about a worldwide taxation system for the large businesses. The bottom line, Mr. President, again, reflected in all of the reform proposals, is that competitive rates, which means lowering rates for small business and businesses of all sizes that do business in the United States, will help us create more jobs, and they will be red, white, and blue jobs. They'll be jobs here in the United States. So, Mr. President, I assume this weekend, whether it's in coffee shops or talk shows or wherever, people are going to be talking about this discussion about taxes, and they'll say, oh, I don't know if those folks in Washington are going to get anything done. And if they do anything, it'll probably just be a temporary thing. And they'll all talk about why, if you had real tax reform, it might not do anything soon, and, well, it'll take a lot more study and that sort of thing. I hope I've been able, Mr. President, this morning to talk about why I believe permanent tax reform will start changing the behavior of consumers in the marketplace, get them back into the marketplace, buying those products that fuel a consumer-driven economy, and they'll start doing it quickly if they see permanent tax reform enacted. And I hope I've been able to outline why a great deal of groundwork has been done already to allow us to move forward, not do the entire tax reform effort in the 6 or 8 weeks that the super committee has, but to get a foundation, a baseline in place, a baseline that is built around these areas of consensus, changes that are advocated essentially by all the reform proposals, and then allow the Senate Finance Committee, under the leadership of Chairman Baucus, and the House Ways and Means Committee, under the leadership of Dave Camp, to use the first few months of next year with their committees. They're the committees of jurisdiction, the Finance Committee here in the Senate, the Ways and Means Committee in the other body. They take the first 90 or 120 days, Mr. President, to enact permanent tax reforms. I think that will be a huge boost for the American economy. I think it will change the behavior of American consumers and American business, because that's what markets do. They react when positive and permanent changes are put in place. This can be thoroughly bipartisan, Mr. President. It was in 1986 when a whole host of quite progressive Democrats got together with Ronald Reagan. And I've had the pleasure over the last few years to work with two outstanding members on the other side of the aisle, former Senator Gregg and Senator Coates, and Senator Begich of Alaska, former small business person. This isn't like health care, Mr. President. We've done it before. We have done it before. The reform proposals are very much built around the same sort of principles which were the fundamentals of tax reform in 1986. And while I know there's going to be considerable debate this weekend about whether tax reform can be done, whether or not it's going to change anybody's behavior or change anybody's behavior soon, I just wanted to weigh in and outline why, looking at the principles of the market, I believe it is going to change consumer behavior, change consumer and business behavior for the better, why there's been a lot of groundwork laid that we can build on. There is an opportunity, Mr. President, an opportunity for Democrats and Republicans in this chamber to come together and take steps that will end this anti-growth mess of a tax system and give our consumers and businesses the certainty and predictability they need to grow, to come back into the American economy. And, Mr. President, we'll talk some more about this on the floor of this great body in the days ahead. I just want the American people to know that this is an opportunity where, if there is a will to do permanent tax reform, there is a way to get it done. Mr. President, with that, I yield the floor, and I note the absence of a quorum.